Xu Fu, alchemist and court sorcerer of the Qin dynasty, possibly the first emperor of Japan, and Yu Mei-Ren's #1 fan. By looking at her class, design, skill set, backstory, and characterization, how well does FGO Xu Fu compare to her historical and mythical counterpart, and what grade would I give her depiction? Let's do this. Xu Fu is an alter ego class servant, which means it's time to figure out what entities have been added to her spirit origin. The first is Shennong, a mythical Chinese emperor/deity said to have ruled in the days before the Xia dynasty, way before written records were kept, and getting close to Gilgamesh in age. He is said to have brought both agriculture and medicine to the Chinese, the origin of various tools, qualities of various herbs, and even the discovery of tea. Shennong is also significant in Vietnam, where he goes by the name Then Nong. The second entity added to Xu Fu is Ame no Mahitotsu, also known as Amatsumara, Japan's patron god for blacksmiths. Notably, Ame no Mahitotsu is said to have only had one eye, which may explain why Xu Fu always has one of her eyes covered by her hair. With that said, the influence from these two deities seems rather small. Looking into the future, there's a scene where Xu Fu ponders why she might be an alter ego, with the conclusion being that this version of her is focused on her affections for Yu Mei-Ren, and less so on her role as an alchemist and sorcerer. As for what other classes Xu Fu could qualify for, Caster is the most obvious choice, and it's what Xu Fu is in Traum. Xu Fu is also an archer boss in her debut event in Summer 5, but I think they only did that because Summer Yu, a lancer, was the event servant in Summer 5, and so making Xu Fu an archer would make it so Xu Fu would be weak to Yu Mei-Ren. Also, don't worry, we will be talking about their relationship later. Getting into her character design, we get to talk about gender first because Xu Fu has been flipped from her historical counterpart. So what does the game say about that? Well, based on her profile, they decided to go with the "history recorded my gender wrong" line, that it was the fault of some bureaucrat who didn't like that Huang hired a woman to seek out the Elixir of Immortality. This isn't entirely crazy. Like many places throughout the world, Imperial China's historians were known to twist facts if it suited the interests of those in power, or to reinforce cultural norms and Confucian hierarchies. This will be a major topic in my future video on Wu Zhe 10, since the negative reputation Chinese historians gave her very much shows in her FGO depiction. Anyway, so does this work for Xu Fu? I guess? It's pretty basic as far as justifications go, but Xu Fu's time in the historical record isn't exactly large, and so perhaps it is easier to get away with. As for her actual design, originally Xu Fu was meant to just be a one-off villain for Summer 5, but her character got enough of a positive reception that she ended up becoming a full servant about 2 years later. She kind of resembles a Jiangxi, a type of Chinese zombie vampire thing, what Shu Tendoji dressed up as in Summer 7. This is likely a deliberate choice due to Xu Fu's obsession with Yu Mei-Ren. As for the rest of Xu Fu's design, her hat seems to be some type of guan, a type of hat worn for millennia in China, with the type of hat symbolizing one's rank or status within society. I asked for help in a community post to identify it, and the most common answer I got back is that, at least for her third ascension, Xu Fu is wearing a Shenzhi guan, the type of hat reserved for judges. It's the second image from the left in this sketch. It's an interesting choice, since one interpretation of Xu Fu's story is that she engaged in a scam, something you don't exactly want judges doing. On a related note, I'd like to offer my thanks to those who helped me out with this. It was a major roadblock I was struggling with. I try to handle everything myself, but there are things that are outside of my knowledge, and so I'm glad I was able to ask and get help with that. Anyway, let's continue. Regarding her ascension forms, the first one is how we first meet her in Summer 5, and is how we tend to see her most often. Her second ascension is how she appeared in Tesla Fest, also known as Space Xu Fu, and accordingly looks much more modern than her other forms. Lastly, her third ascension is what she says she wore when setting out on her voyage, never to return to her homeland. Overall, I'd say Xu Fu has a good design, depicting her as a spellcaster of Chinese origin, while also giving strong hints about her character, her obsession with Yu Mei-Ren being strong enough that she is holding a doll of her in every ascension form. Moving into her skill set, Xu Fu's first skill is 5-grain praise, which references both Xu Fu herself as well as the god Shennong attached to her spirit origin. I've already mentioned Shennong's link to both agriculture and medicine, so what about Xu Fu? Well, in Japan, Xu Fu, or rather Jofuku, is herself a minor god of agriculture, medicine, and silk. She is said to have brought seeds of 5 different types of grains to Japan, though what exactly those grains were I'm not sure about. I'll be talking more about this later, but Xu Fu is widely believed to have landed in Japan, and might have made significant contributions to the development of Japanese civilization. Xu Fu's second skill is Taoist Arts Out, representing Xu Fu's talents as a sorcerer and Taoist practitioner. This is something the real Xu Fu is said to have been, so that's pretty straightforward. However, Xu Fu's version of this skill is limited compared to someone like Taigong Huang, since Xu Fu doesn't have a thought key, roughly an Eastern version of a magic crest in the Fate franchise. In other words, while Xu Fu does have knowledge of Taoist spells, she is not a master of them like Taigong Huang or Zhang Jue. Since Xu Fu tends to be better known as an alchemist in her quest to find the Elixir of Immortality, her not being depicted as a super-powered Taoist sage does make sense to me. Lastly, Xu Fu's third skill is Legend of Xu Fu, which, well, that skill name is really specific, isn't it? That could mean literally anything. Thankfully, her profile helps clear this up. This refers to the legend of Xu Fu having landed in Japan, bringing with her various tools, agricultural practices, and medicines that are said to have made a great impact upon Japan's civilization. There are many memorials and possible burial sites for Xu Fu located in Japan, where he has been given the name Jofuku, even being made into a minor deity. It is even claimed by some that Xu Fu might actually be Emperor Jimmu, the mythical first emperor of Japan, or that perhaps the legends of the two may have been conflated to some degree. As you might expect, this is something that is still debated among historians, and is unlikely to be resolved anytime soon. There is little doubt that the real Xu Fu landed in Japan and had some impact, but as to just how important he was, that remains very much uncertain. Now, FGO makes no references to Xu Fu possibly being Emperor Jimmu. That would probably be too controversial, but it certainly does mention Xu Fu's expedition landing in Japan, since it is a major part of the story of Summer 5.
不老も不死も人の究極願望若い山で生きたまま老いたくない死にたくない故にこれなるは不老不死の霊薬なりはい一本グイッと
Xu Fu's noble phantasm is, I present the elixir of eternal life, Lai, whereupon she summons some talismans, creates a yin and yang symbol, then uses that power to give herself some buffs. While this MP is heavy on the Taoist imagery, its name is about something else. This refers to the most famous story about Xu Fu, being sent to find the Elixir of Immortality by Qinshi Huang. But since, of course, Xu Fu never actually found that elixir, and might not have even tried to look for it, this MP is a lie. What we get instead is Xu Fu whipping up something that she can use to heal herself and get a ton of critical stars, which, while very useful, probably isn't going to fool anybody. Little wonder that she took off never to return. I'll be getting into much greater detail about this when we get to her backstory. Listed in Xu Fu's profile is another MP that isn't in-game, Immortal Slayer Failure. This refers to the events of Summer 5, when Xu Fu is trying to find a way to kill Yu Mei-Ren so that she might escape the curse of immortality. But Xu Fu didn't quite succeed at that, instead giving us this MP which is a bit too limited to actually be useful, only able to work on those with direct ties to death, but who also have no links to the underworld. In other words, it can give us all those comedic deaths you suffered during Summer 5, but that's about it. But as you might expect, this is entirely an FGO thing, and has nothing to do with the legends of Xu Fu. Xu Fu's craft essence is No Time to Die, depicting Xu Fu lying in bed. The CE's text makes it clear what is going on here. She is trying to dictate her will, but she keeps getting distracted by various different concerns, eventually shouting that she's too busy to die. It's rather silly, leaning into Xu Fu's characterization as a workaholic. It is also a reference to Summer 5, since the projects she mentions in the text include work she was carrying out atop Mount Horai, trying to find ways to kill immortals that her descendants would continue for the next 2200 years. In other words, this is another reference to things exclusive to FGO that have nothing to do with the real Xu Fu. Well, Mount Horai does since it's the Japanese name for Mount Panglai, but that's it. Looking into the future, Xu Fu's Valentines CE is still in joint production, depicting a table covered in yummy things in the process of being made. Based on the CE's text and what I was able to dig up, Xu Fu's Valentine's scene has her grab both the protagonist and Sancho to help her make chocolate for Valentine's Day. Chocolate for who? Well, that should be pretty obvious. And if it isn't obvious, it's Yu Mei-Ren. Naturally, the protagonist gets to keep some of the created chocolate for themselves. This CE is basically a memento of the time they spent together to make this chocolate. Now for characterization, starting with a look into the legends concerning Xu Fu. So who is Xu Fu? Xu Fu was an alchemist and sorcerer that lived on Xu Fu Island, a small island on the northern coast of the Shandong Peninsula. Said to be born in the year 255 BCE, we know basically nothing about Xu Fu's early life. Like many minor historical figures, we only really know about Xu Fu due to his connection to another, more famous individual, Qin Shi Huang, Emperor of the Qin Dynasty, the first Emperor of China. Because of this, much like my recent video on Skahak, this video will be as much about Qin Shi Huang as it is about Xu Fu. Anyway, Qin Shi Huang had managed to unify China in 221 BCE, the first to ever do so. Yet despite all of that power, there was something that nagged at him, something that continued to haunt his thoughts. He was afraid of dying. Can't say I blame him, most people have that worry, but most people don't have an entire empire under their command. And also, most people don't have assassination attempts on their life significant enough that the failed assassin becomes a servant. Throughout his reign, in addition to massive infrastructure projects, standardizing measurements, written language, and organizing the state, the emperor sent instructions to governors and officials across his empire to seek out the secrets of immortality. Since he was known for being rather harsh towards people who failed him, this added extra urgency to these efforts. Of the various people the emperor tasked to find the Elixir of Immortality, he put the most trust in Xu Fu, who seemed to actually have a plan. In Chinese myth, there are said to be several mountains in the eastern seas, what we know today as the Pacific Ocean. These mountains are said to be where the immortals reside, and so naturally if one could find one of these mountains, someone would be able to meet the immortals and perhaps learn the secrets of eternal life. Xu Fu claimed that he could undertake an expedition to find Mount Panglai in the Eastern Ocean, if only he could get enough resources to succeed. The emperor agreed, giving Xu Fu what he asked for in the year 219 BCE. Now, what did Xu Fu ask for? No less than 60 ships, around 100 craftsmen, and 3,000 virgin boys and girls, an offering for the immortals living upon Mount Panglai, supposedly. Over the next 9 years, the emperor awaited word of Xu Fu's progress, but as the years and more assassination attempts followed, he became increasingly anxious about what was taking so long. Yet in the reports being sent back to the capital, there was always some obstacle in the way, a magic barrier, or a large sea creature that kept the ships from going out to sea further. Finally, in 210 BCE, Qin Shi Huang had enough, deciding to visit Xu Fu Island to inquire what was taking so long. Xu Fu did his best to persuade the emperor to give him more time. As they took a ship out to sea, Xu Fu again mentioned the large sea monster who kept interfering with the expedition. Then, with impeccable timing, something large, perhaps a whale, appeared in the water. The emperor himself took a crossbow and shot the creature until it died, and so took care of the sea monster that had been frustrating Xu Fu's expedition. With this done, Qin Shi Huang ordered Xu Fu to set out again. Faced with the prospect of either finding the mystical Mount Panglai or being murderized, Xu Fu set sail in the year 210 BCE, and disappeared from the historical record. What became of Xu Fu, his 60 ships, and its 3,000 passengers has been the subject of speculation and investigation ever since. Ironically, he wouldn't have to worry about retaliation. Qin Shi Huang would die on the journey home, and his empire would collapse soon after. As for Xu Fu, some think that he took his ships, craftsmen, and 3,000 children and set himself up as a king somewhere, that this was all a giant scam. Others say that he sailed to Korea, landing on Jeju Island, perhaps on the way to his final destination. The most accepted theory is that Xu Fu sailed east, and ended up landing on the Japanese home islands, probably Kyushu. Once in Japan, it is said that Xu Fu found Mount Panglai, or Mount Horai to the Japanese. There are multiple places in Japan dedicated to Xu Fu, Jofuku, and even several mountains named Mount Horai. What the true story is remains unclear, but what is clear is that the legend of Xu Fu continues to intrigue even 2,200 years after he vanished from the historical record. Shifting over to Fate Grand Order, we first meet Xu Fu in the Servant Summer Camp event, Summer 5. The protagonist and friends are sent into the mountains of Japan, setting themselves up in a cabin by the lake. But right from the start, both Xiang Yu and Qin Shi Huang are excluded from the singularity, with the emperor even making a reference to Xu Fu's voyage, as if he already knows what will be found there. It certainly makes sense that Xu Fu would want to hide from Qin Huang, even a Lost Belt version of him. Over time, you discover the truth about this place, that this is Mount Horai, where Xu Fu and the 3,000 passengers of her expedition settled after landing in Japan. Closing themselves off from the world, they worked for the next 2,200 years not to find an elixir of immortality, but the opposite, a way to kill immortals. Xu Fu had one very specific immortal in mind, Yu Mei-Ren, who it is said that she met in life, heard Yu lament about her inability to die, and so sought to find a solution, for Xu Fu to find a way to help end Yu Mei-Ren's immortality. There are all sorts of crazy things happening in this singularity, that the two sides of the lake mirror each other, all the experiments, and that Xu Fu was disguising herself as the protagonist. Oh, and we also get to see Yu Mei-Ren get murdered in a variety of hilarious ways, all inspired by horror movie tropes. Summer 5 is one of my favorite events, with its mix of terror, comedy, and Xu Fu's earnest motivations. But as far as lore goes, well, you may have noticed in the backstory section that I didn't say a word about Xu Fu and Yu Mei-Ren meeting. Now, is it possible that they met? Technically, yes. We don't know when Yu Mei-Ren was born, but we know that she died in the year 202 BCE, 8 years after Xu Fu left China, never to return. For added comparison, Xiang Yu lived from 232 to 202 BCE. So Xu Fu and Yu Mei-Ren were alive at the same time, but did they actually meet? There is nothing in the historical record to suggest that. Now, you could argue that since Xu Fu was looking for the Elixir of Immortality, it may be interesting to have her meet an actual immortal. But, spoiler alert for my future video on her, Yu Mei-Ren wasn't immortal, unless she really is like her fate counterpart and is lurking somewhere in today's world. Xu Fu's next appearance was in Battle in New York 2024, also known as Tesla Fest. Here, Xu Fu makes only a small appearance, notable only for the fact that it's the first time we've seen her since Summer 5, and that she gets to show off her new sprite, hinting at future adventures. She then appears during Lost Belt 6.5, Traum, where she serves as a caster for the Righteous Realm. Since Yu Mei-Ren is nowhere to be found here, we actually get to see Xu Fu act more like a sorcerer. Her skills are decisive for the assassination mission against Zhang Jue, where she helps get through the defenses of his fortress. Xu Fu also helps in the battle against the Reinstatement Realm, creating a defense similar to what Zhang Jue had used to defend a forest, at least until Kiyohime showed up and burned the whole forest down. Looking into the future, Summer 9 is still ongoing on JP, and Xu Fu just got herself a summer version there. So, at the very least, we know that Xu Fu has more appearances to come, in events, and perhaps in main story content as well. And now for the verdict. What grade would I give Xu Fu's depiction in Fate Grand Order? Well, her character design and skill set are pretty good, with plentiful links to Xu Fu's legends, fate characterization, and cultural background. I find it especially fitting that her MP is a fake version of the Elixir of Immortality she was supposed to find. But as for characterization, there are only a few references here and there to Xu Fu's part in searching for that elixir. Instead, the overwhelming bulk of Xu Fu's depiction is given over to her obsessive affection for Yu Mei-Ren, a relationship there is no basis for in the historical record. Now, normally having such a major part of a fate character have nothing to do with their legend, that's usually enough for me to set them ablaze. But in Xu Fu's case, she has one thing going for her, the fact that her own legend itself has an uncertain ending. We don't truly know what happened to Xu Fu after she set out on her expedition in 210 BCE. It is said that she might have visited Korea before settling in Japan, but we only have fragments. There is a lack of solid proof. Because of that, it leaves the door open for interpretation, and makes me hesitant to set Xu Fu on fire. But let's make this clear. Was Xu Fu actually secretly looking for a way to kill immortals? To help the wife of some warlord find death, when her own death is literally the most famous thing about her? I seriously doubt it. And so for a final grade, I am going to give Xu Fu, Seeker of the Elixir of Immortality, a D-. If you would like to learn more about another practitioner of Taoist magic that Xu Fu faced off against in Traum, check out my video on Zhang Jue here. Until next time.